Barry, welcome to Talbot Towers. And you've written an absolutely fascinating book about your interactions with Richard Satchwell. He was convicted of murdering his wife, Tina Satchwell, last year. A really horrific case in which he reported his wife missing. She remained supposedly missing for many years until eventually Garda revisited the case and it emerged he had buried her body underneath the stairs and hallway of their own family home. You have covered many missing persons cases, like that's your specialty.
Yeah.
You've written, what, 5 books?
Yeah.
You know, as missing persons cases go, when this story first came into the public domain, I think it was a few months after Tina had been reported missing in 2017. What caught you about this case at that time? Did you think well, this is an interesting missing woman. Has she just run off on her husband, or, you know, what drew you into it?
It was Richard. He was what caught my attention. And I know many families of missing people. I've interviewed many families, and emotions can be different with families, and there can be many justifiable emotions that a family will have. Richard stood out because he was different.
How?
He had different emotions at different times. He also would refer to himself a lot and how Tina's disappearance, whatever it was impacting upon him, and that he hadn't been able to sleep and he was missing her terribly, and the effect on the animals as well. What struck me was although he would mention Tina's name, he wasn't talking much about her, or when he was making these appeals at the start on RTE and TV3 especially, he wasn't talking to Tina a lot. He would say, in one interview he said, "Tina, come home." He went on Crime Call. He was very tearful on the Crime Call interview. But that was different to the way he was in some of the other interviews, in that he would seem somewhat more quiet, or something different to the tears. The tears came in that big Crime Call appeal, but they didn't remain in other interviews. So all of that, I just thought that was interesting. It was different. I didn't know if there was a crime at all. I mean, what struck me was Tina would have had the right to leave if she wanted to and go missing. She had that right to just leave whatever life she was in if she felt she needed to. And I had to figure that out as I did my research. Could she have done a runner? Could she have fled somewhere? Was she in a better place? Was she safe? But I figured out that that wasn't the case, that she didn't have any support network that had got her away. Her family, her loved ones in Fermoy, they were missing her as well. But Richard was the one who was in Youghal. He was the one making all the appeals.
He was front of house.
He was absolutely there. And he was very approachable in that sense, in that he although he didn't do every interview requested of him, it seemed he was on television, he was in a lot of newspapers, he was on radio. He seemed to be everywhere. Yeah.
But just to go back, we're talking now about 2017, wasn't it? May 2017. I think, when he reported Tina missing.
Well, he reported her, she didn't report her missing in March, but he went to the Gardaí to let them know she'd left the family home. And that's what also piqued the interest of Gardaí as well, that he was telling them something, but didn't want to make a fuss. But he wanted them to know she wasn't where she should be or would normally be.
So Tina disappeared, according to Richard, when?
The 20th of March 2017, and he said the last he saw of her was her waving him off as he headed off from Youghal to go to Aldi in Dungarvan to do some shopping. And he described how she was there in the house, and that was the last he saw of her. But that he waited, and what also piqued my interest early on was the fact that, and he was talking about it, he waited 5 days before he reported her missing. I decided to go through the Gardaí to get to Tina's loved ones, her family, which included Richard, but he wasn't the only one. So I went through the Gardaí to say that I wanted to do this big report, and could I talk to each member of the family. So that's how I got Richard's mobile number. And he they would have said whatever about me and what I wanted to do. And he said, yeah, he'd be happy to chat on the phone with me. So I rang him. And so everything was building up to that phone call. Now, he could have said no. He could have said, don't want to talk to you. Because I knew at that stage he was being a little more selective. He had said no to one or two journalists who had knocked on his door to cold call and look for interview. I was fairly direct with him, Maeve. I said, what I want to do is come into your house. I want to film inside your house. That's where Tina was last seen. It's something that hasn't been done yet. I know one or two journalists have been inside and they've taken photographs or whatever, but no video footage has been taken. No interview within the property. I want to come into your house was basically it. I was kind of trying to invite myself in, and he said yes on the phone. He said yeah, and I was surprised he said yes so quickly. I was very happy he did. And I knew from the conversation, just had an instinct that he wasn't going to fob me off afterwards. That if he was saying yes, he meant yes. The last sighting of Tina was in her home. And I said to myself, well, that's where we need to be. And to learn as much as we can about Tina in the hope of helping the case, telling the real story, whatever it might be.
Yeah. So you went down to see him then with a camera crew?
We arrived down around 4:30 in the evening, and I had arranged by text with Richard that maybe around 5 o'clock or so, he'd let me know that he'd be out working and I'd be home, and we'd be called to the house. So we were nearby, and then he texted to say he was home. So we got our gear and walked down, camera lights and camera and tripod, and the three of us headed up to the door. And I knocked on the door. Richard opened it fairly quickly, and in we went. And it's only in the next few minutes that the sensations came, because you're walking into somebody's home, you're looking around, you're trying to figure out, well, where are we going? And he directed us into the sitting room. To get to the sitting room, you walk in the front door. The stairs is straight ahead of you, where you could walk up the stairs. But before you get to the stairs, you find you're actually in a living room, an open plan living room. You turn right. So before you get to the stairs, you turn right, and then right again. So you're coming in to the sitting room here. So front door here, there's a wall, and in the other side is the sitting room. And that's where we did our interview. So we right again, into the sitting room. And this is a very small living space, because it's 3 stories. So all told, for 2 people, 2 dogs and a parrot, it would have been small but livable, I suppose. But we found we were 4 people, Richard and the 3 of us from RTE, in this room with a camera, a parrot in the corner looking at us. It was quite a confined space. Yeah. That was the only place to do the interview, because talking about the sensations, we figured out pretty quickly, once we got to the stairs and turned right, that there was clutter in the living room. Just things on the floor, things lying around. You couldn't really turn. But in the sitting room, there was a little more space. There was a 2-seater couch. So myself and Richard ended up sitting on the 2-seater. Kevin had to stand or half sit during the interview behind Shirley, who was training the camera on the 2 of us this way. But all very, you had to be careful which way you turn for fear you'd knock into somebody else in the room. And then the other sensation was smells.
So you're sitting. It was when you're sitting down. You say hello, do all that, sit down, settle yourselves in. And is it then when you're just sitting down on the sofa, Richard next to you, that you start taking in the atmosphere?
Yeah, and there were 2 things I noticed: how cold it was in the house, because we'd come in from a cold night into the house, but I felt that the house was colder, and I kind of figured that although it also seemed that no windows had been opened, because it was very dusty. Dust was kind of hanging in the air. Later, as it went on, a couple of flies were flying around. That I just felt there was no air getting into the room. But the smells as well, which didn't hit me immediately. It was more when I was sitting down, catching my breath, kind of getting myself all set for the interview, and that I started to realize that I could smell dog feces, or what I thought was, and I would still say was dog feces. And then I was looking over at the parrot cage, and I could see, so maybe I could see something as well as smell. I could see the parrot poo trapped on the bars of the cage as Valentine the parrot was looking back. It was a dirty cage, hadn't been well maintained. So I kind of was looking at the parrot poo, and smelling dog poo, and that kind of hit me. But despite all that, we stayed. I mean, we were in the house for
there was
2 hours. We were in the house.
Yeah.
And I could smell body odor.
Yeah.
Which was grand. I mean, that was fine to me. This was a man in from a hard day's work delivering tires. He'd already told me. He was facilitating us by doing an interview. That's how I felt. Like he was only in the door, and here we were. But yeah, I could smell him too.
Was there any other odour that you mingling in with that? I suppose, look, what I'm asking is, you were unaware then, but Tina was just feet from you as you sat there unknown to you.
Yeah.
And how can a body be buried there with for so long without, she had only been there a year, less than a year.
Less, it was just about 7 or 8 months at that stage. Yeah. No, I mean, the smells that I can remember are those that I can identify.
Yeah.
As the animal smells and the body odor. But there was all of that combined. There was something off or something wrong about the whole situation. But no, I had no thought, even after leaving the house 2 hours later. I certainly left thinking, well, that was some experience and that was odd. And but I didn't leave thinking that Tina might be in the house. I had no idea, no concept of that. Despite the weirdness, there was nothing to indicate that. And also, just thinking back that how brazen he was, at the end of the interview and the other filming we did in that front room, he invited myself and Kevin upstairs to look at the wardrobes, this walk-in wardrobe that he had built for Tina the year before. So he brought us actually up the stairs. And just thinking back now, that even in us walking out and going up the stairs and then coming back down the stairs, there was nothing indicated at all that there might be anything hidden under the stairs. They went in 2023. They had started reviewing it back 2 years before.
Yeah.
Quietly. I didn't know they were going back in. Nobody really knew they were going in to the degree they were in terms of looking at the case file, re-interviewing Richard, all of that. And they had figured out through getting into his different phones that he had a Google Maps thing open, which would show where the phone had been on particular days at very specific times, which meant that his elaborate stories about different things at different times on the day Tina disappeared could be shown to be untrue. Whatever the truth was, certainly what he was saying was not the truth.
He wasn't where he said he was at a certain time.
There were certain chunks of the day where it was unaccounted for, or he had never told that he'd driven. For example, he came back from Dungarvan, he went for a drive up for 40 minutes up to the cliff area where he had proposed to Tina years before. He never spoke about that. It's perhaps quite telling, on the day that he murdered her, he did go and have time to himself for whatever he was thinking of. Was there remorse, or was he thinking of what was he going to do with the body, or what were the ways to cover his tracks, or what? But he never said that he didn't come directly home from Dungarvan, that he went from Dungarvan to the cliff, then to the house. He said he went straight to the house and sure she was gone, which which wasn't the case at all. So all of that meant that the cold case team had come to a point where in October 2023, they had enough information to arrest Richard, to put all his different stories to him to try and get at the truth. He was arrested on suspicion of murder, and they carried out the search of 3 Grattan Street, which at that stage, it was very clear the Gardaí in the original search in June 2017 had not excavated the inside or outside of the house, because there was a bit of the back garden where you could work away if you wanted to hide somebody out the back, and Gardaí were conscious of that, so they needed to search all of that. But yeah, it was a dramatic evening when he was arrested and they sealed off the house, and it was the next day, late the next day, that the first indication came that there was something amiss, something hidden within the property.
And that was thanks to the cadaver dog in a large part, whose name was Fern.
Fern the cadaver dog, and also the human interaction as well, because what Fern was doing was she was running around and showing great interest in the stairs and the bottom of the stairs, sniffing away, and kept coming back to the stairs, the bottom steps. But that wasn't a firm indication of something, because for Fern to indicate she would actually go down and freeze, down on all fours, and wouldn't move, that would mean she'd found a sign of a body. But the constant sniffing and furtive moving around meant she was trying to figure out, it was that she was halfway there in a sense, so that they knew there was something there, or something somewhere, but where exactly was the question. And so builder James McNamara, under direction from the Gardaí, later got in and dug down under the stairs, and it was actually quite easy when he started digging. The cement crumbled quite easily because it hadn't been a professional job.
You recount this in detail in your book, of course, and also it emerged during his trial. Like at that point when he was arrested, and as the house was being searched, and as Fern was doing her thing, he was denying. He stuck to his story.
Yeah. But he would deny right up to the end. So he was shown initially some images to show that Gardaí were fully intent on excavating. He still didn't say, well, you're going to find what they found. He was still saying that he'd nothing else to add, nothing to say. So he was actually released without charge from his first period of detention. And it was the next day that he was then rearrested when it became clear that that human remains had been found. Gardaí were watching him all the time while he was on release to see where he might go. But he was free. Richard could have decided to head for Dublin or head for wherever after being released the first time, but he didn't. He hung around. I'm very interested in it, not simply to dwell on what he did, but also because of all the other missing people that are out there. This is a man who could have got away with it, and we'd all be none the wiser, but for the work of certain Gardaí and forensic archaeologist Niamh McCullough, who came into the case, and they came to the decision that they had to get back into that house and excavate and search it completely. But if they hadn't been in position doing their jobs, who knows?
Who knows?
Also, if I hadn't got into that house and other journalists hadn't interviewed Richard, there wouldn't be the historical evidence that was then presented in a trial. And that wasn't why I'd never sat down with Richard thinking one day this is going to be shown in court in a murder trial.